Welcome to East Coast Winemaking, the podcast that brings professional winemaking experience from popular wine regions on the East Coast of the United States to wherever you are. I'm your host, John Monier. I'm a Finger Lakes winemaker, and I'm excited to provide easy access to educational and entertaining interviews with other winemakers and industry professionals. In each episode, we'll cover the background and unique perspective of my guest on how they approach the craft of winemaking. I'm excited for the opportunity to learn from seasoned wine pros and hope these interviews can be informative to both colleagues in the industry as well as relative newcomers. Feel free to email questions or comments to eastcoastwinemaking@gmail.com and follow us at East Coast Winemaking on Instagram to be notified when new episodes come out. If you're interested in checking out my wine called John Albert, you can find info on that at johnalbertwine.com. Hello, wine friends. I hope everybody's doing super duper as they're preparing to listen to this. It is officially summer in the Finger Lakes, and I am sweating over here. I hope everybody is in an air-conditioned room, or maybe it's wintertime by the time we're listening to this. At this point, I feel like I'm ready for winter. I'm over sweating. Anyway, today I'm bringing you an interview with some friends of mine, Alex and Julia Alvarez-Perez. They are a duo that co-own, wine-make, vineyard manage the wines for a brand called Usonia, which is located in Ovid, New York. They have a minimal intervention philosophy and style. They're working with some vinifera varieties as well as some hybrid varieties. They are doing some really interesting things, and they had been on my list of people to interview since early on in this podcast, and so I'm excited to be getting around to speaking with them, and it was as informative as I expected it to be. Not to say anything crazy here, but I was telling them after the podcast that they made some good arguments, and as somebody who was not a fan of minimal intervention styles in the past, you know, I feel like I'm starting to get it now, and I owe that to them. So I hope you find this interview as informative and educational as I did. We did a lot of giggling together, so I hope that comes across and isn't too grating, my laugh at least. And anyway, I'll cut to the chase. I hope y'all enjoy this interview with Alex and Julia Alvarez-Perez of Usonia Wine. Hello, everybody. I'm here with Alex and Julia Alvarez-Perez of Usonia Wine. We're sitting in their tasting space in Ovid, which is super snazzy. If anybody knows Usonia's like vibe, their labels, they need to come to the tasting space and see, because it's super, I would call it hip. I don't know if they'll hate me for calling it hip, but it's pretty sick here.
We're pretty hip.
Thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure, absolutely. Apologize in advance for anybody like else. I was just explaining to Alex and Julia that they're the first duo that I've interviewed, and I have one mic to share between them. And the mic works best if it's like 4 inches from your lips, so they're doing some gymnastics to try and both have the opportunity to speak at the same time.
There's going to be an awkward pause before every answer as Julia and I look back and forth and point at each other.
I think we'll hit that flow state. You know, we're sipping some of their wine, which is already delicious. This is 2023 Riesling, right?
Yep, from Standing Stone Farms, so farmed by the Weimer crew, their property on the east side of Seneca Lake, and it comes from their biodynamic block.
Cool. I'm going to ask you more questions about all your wines later. One of the most interesting things, or things that I'm most excited to ask you about, are some of your production practices. So I'm trying not to get too far ahead of myself because I'm very excited. So if you would please start by explaining from where your interest in wine began, whether that was wine production or consumption or whatever, however long ago it was in your life, and all of the important and notable events along the way that got you from there to here. Take it away, Alex and Julia.
Okay, I'll go first. I grew up outside of Baltimore in Maryland and didn't really have any or much interest in wine until I studied in Italy my junior year of undergrad.
Did you go to Italy for wine?
No. So I was studying history in my undergrad, and I just wanted to study in Italy. I was also studying Italian language and literature. And during my course of my year abroad in Bologna, I just started drinking a lot of wine and got, I don't want to say really into it. I was sort of just 19 years old and drinking. But that was my first introduction into wine. And I guess like the larger food culture that is in Italy. So I did a farm internship at a place called Tenuta di Spinocchia, which is...
God bless you.
Thank you. Which is just outside of Siena. And it's a really fantastic internship program that they have where they do a group of 6 to 10 interns every season. So spring, summer, and fall. And I did the fall internship program this would have been 2010, 15 years ago.
Jiminy Christmas.
Yeah. I was very young at the time.
It doesn't feel like 15 years ago to me either, if it makes you feel better.
Yeah, and with the internship program, every intern has a sort of specialization. So I chose to be in the vineyard and olive groves.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you could either be in the orto, which is like the vegetable plot. You could be with the animals. So we raised a heritage breed of pig and some cows. Or you could be in the vineyards and the olive groves. And I was interested in wine production because I was drinking a lot of it. I was also working at a restaurant back home at the time. So really kind of learning more about specifically Italian wine. And that was my first harvest experience. And it was very much like old school Italian. We made Sangiovese and Trebbiano in a small little cantina. Not a lot in the way of technology and, bottling by hand. And you just kind of drink the wine that's made on the premise.
# old world.
Very old world.
That sounds really fun.
Yeah. It was amazing. And
No wine glasses anywhere near the place, just drinking it out of little water glasses.
yeah, I mean, you were working with like old Italians who do not drink water and you only drank Sangiovese. So yeah, that was my first harvest experience. It was a really, I think, formative 3 months for me.
Did you spend that mostly in the vineyard or in the cellar or both?
A little bit of both. Because I think it started end of August and we wrapped up right before Thanksgiving. So there was some vineyard work. And it was very much the model of, I think, of a lot of smaller wineries in Italy and France where during harvest you pick all day. That's how you spend your time. And then you come back and you process the fruit in the evening. And then you wake up the next day and you do it over again.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think one of the big differences between European or small-scale European winemaking and, let's say, American winemaking, at least here in the Finger Lakes, is you only pick what you can process in a day. You don't send the machine picker out there to pick 8 tons if you can only process 3 in a day, realistically.
Yeah.
Let me tell you more about your biography.
That reminds me, I've only ever been in like wine country since I've been old enough to be aware of what I was seeing once. And it was through like Champagne and Burgundy. And one of the things that I feel kind of ignorant saying it now because it was like last year, I was 31 and I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but like how rural all of the major winemaking towns are. I mean, I don't know. I was just surprised that the Finger Lakes seemed like so, I don't want to say professional, but like corporate or businessy, and for anybody who's been into a small scale Finger Lakes winery, that's not what it's like, but it's like, these people have their wine production like on their home property, and the places where they keep their barrels are like under their houses, or down the block, and the
barrels never leave the cellar because there's like one staircase in, and there's like no realistic way to get them out and clean them or anything.
Yeah. So anyway, I just as I'm thinking back to that experience and hearing you describe yours, I guess I'm just hoping that I can get a good mental image of what you're describing. It sounds like a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. And I was very young at the time. I think that was my first introduction into how wine is made. And that was always kind of how I consumed it at the time. So yeah, I did that program, and that led me to do another year of study, this time in northern Italy. But this time I was specifically studying food, or my degree is in food culture and communications, from the University of Gastronomic Sciences, which is just outside of Turin. It's the slow food university. And that time I wasn't specializing in wine, but studying all aspects of food, but really just eating and drinking my way around.
Did you call it slow food?
Yes.
Like the opposite of fast food?
Yes. Are you familiar with slow food?
No, I've never. I don't think I've ever heard that phrase before.
Oh God, we don't have time to go into slow food, but it's an organization that was founded in Italy originally as a protest against McDonald's opening up in the Piazza di Spagna in Rome, and it then expanded. It was really big in the 90s and early 2000s.
Interesting.
As sort of a way to preserve like traditional foods and traditional food cultures against like homogenization and the corporate food culture that's since developed.
Sure. Well, in 2025, it's easy to get on that bandwagon, I feel like.
It was it started in the late 80s, if I'm not mistaken, and really grew in the 90s and early 2000s, like right as foodie culture was taking off.
So there's like a guide and like a a snail of approval, like, and it can be wine, it can be hazelnuts or honey or cheese or
interesting.
It's
certain protected products. There's like protected products, like this type of Parmigiano Reggiano can only be produced in this like little town outside of Parma according to these methods. So there's a lot of work to protect these like traditional food pathways and means of production.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Sorry, I'll let you get back to it, and I'll stop interrupting you, and I'll let you tell your story.
So I did that program for a year. I met some really good people along the way. One of them convinced me we should move to Brooklyn because it's 2012 and everybody's moving to Brooklyn. And there's a part called Bushwick that's really hip right now. So I moved to Brooklyn in 2012 and was just looking for work in restaurants because that's sort of all I had known at that point, and ended up working at Terroir. Is this where I pass the mic to you?
Sure.
Yeah.
So like Jules, I grew up in a house that wasn't at all focused on wine. I have memories of my parents drinking a glass of wine when they came home from work, but it was anonymous Pinot Grigio or something. Or
where in the world did you grow up?
Oh, sorry, I grew up in Buffalo, New York. Go Bills!
Go Bills!
Yeah. Not far from here. I grew up in Buffalo. I went to New York City for school, for college, and then I was working as a busboy and a bartender at a wine bar in Brooklyn Heights. But it was not at all like an intense and like high level wine program. I was literally just pouring things based on like the variety. Like I just knew, we have a Sauvignon Blanc, we have a whatever Malbec, and that was back in 2000. I would have worked there from like 2008 to 2012 ish, I think. In 2012 is when I randomly applied for a job at Terroir, which is like a sort of famous wine bar in New York City. Julia and I both got hired to open a location in Park Slope. And Terroir is kind of most known for its owner. It's this guy, Paul Greco, who is kind of psycho. He eccentric. He is number one, extremely passionate about Riesling. So during the summer, we would do quote unquote summer of Riesling, and the only wine we would pour by the glass is Riesling.
Whoa!
And it's not like, we turned over a 6-glass list to Riesling. It was like, we had 30 options of Riesling from all over the world.
What sticks out to me as especially impressive about that is that it feels kind of against the grain. I mean, to be in a Riesling-heavy region, it's easy, I feel like, to get in your mind that Riesling is bigger than it is as far as certainly the domestic market is concerned. And so to hear that this wine bar would pour so many Rieslings, it seems crazy.
Yeah. And especially at the time.
But kudos, because... Yeah, especially at the time, everybody thought Riesling was sweet. Terroir was also kind of like, I would say, the first cool wine bar. We're in the era of Wild Ale and Four Horsemen. I think we automatically think of wine bars as being like cool places that play loud music and sell really fun wine and like are exciting places to hang out. But I feel like before Terroir, most wine bars had like leather banquettes and anonymous Pinot Grigio or Napa Cab. Paul's whole aesthetic was kind of this crazy mishmash of like deep wine knowledge. Like the wine list would actually have really deep historical dives into regions, but it would, be comparing the Phoenicians in Andalusia and the planting of the original grapevines 3,000 years ago there to, I don't know, Detroit techno musicians pioneering techno. Fascinating.
Yeah, and there would be like pictures of soccer players and philosophers and the psychedelic furs in the wine list. It was a really cool place to work.
It sounds like a cool place.
Yeah.
So ultimately, this is where you two met.
Yeah, so we met... Yeah, in 2012, working at this wine bar, I think we were both really young and like had our thoughts about.
You're both still young.
We're both really young, haven't aged a day. But I feel like at least I felt very confident in my like understanding of wine and the larger wine world. And I think Paul really kind of put us in our place and really hammered home like what is the point of wine and what are the stories that we need to tell and how do we get people just to like, if you know nothing, great, come on in, we'll pour you some wine. If you think you know everything, cool, let's talk about all the nerdy stuff. But it was a place for everyone, it felt like. Maybe the people of Park Slope at the time didn't realize that. Yeah. It only lasted about 2 years.
Really?
Yeah. Well, we worked there together from 2012 for about a year. But yeah, that's how we met. And
so that one location of Terroir only lasted for about 2 years.
Wow.
The original location was in the East Village, and now there's still a location in Tribeca. So it's still there. You can go still drink.
Cool.
A shitload of Riesling, yeah.
If I can just say at this point, your lives kind of seem like a winemaker movie, because to have two young adults meet at a hip wine bar in the city only to go on to open their own winery and label in upstate New York, like, is such a feel-good story.
it's a feel-good
story. Yeah, we haven't gotten...
Exactly. Not to say it's not a shitload of work.
I heard,
yeah. Yeah, Alex came in limping today, if it's any...
For what it's worth, Alex still has nightmares about Paul Greco. So yes, it's a feel-good movie all around.
So you two meet at the Terroir, and what's the story that gets you from there to Usonia?
I was pretty sick of New York after about 10 months of being there, which is kind of pathetic. Alex was already looking to move out to the West Coast. So Alex moved out to San Francisco to work in restaurants. I actually went to Oregon and I worked at Harvest in the Willamette Valley. And then after Harvest wrapped up, met him down in San Francisco. So we both worked in restaurants in San Francisco for 3 years, 3.5, 4 years. I mean, we were both more or less restaurant people. I had a little production experience, but that was about it. And I think this is where our stories diverge a little bit. I was sick of working in restaurants in San Francisco.
I could have done it for another year. So we were there for 3.5, 4 years. Jules was GMing restaurants. I was somming. And I think, we we're kind of burnt out on restaurants.
It seems like hard work, hard hours, stressful life.
Yeah, and
everything I've never worked in a restaurant, but everything that I hear about it makes it sound difficult.
It's a fun life, especially if you work with good people. And if you can find purpose in it, it can be really rewarding. I still do kind of miss the more like hospitality driven aspects of it. But yeah, it's an industry where if you succeed and are quote unquote promoted, that means that you now work 14-hour shifts instead of 8-hour shifts and you make less money. Yeah. So it's easy to get burnt out. And I think, I don't really remember how the conversation about like exploring winemaking came up. I kind of feel like we were just sort of sick of restaurants, knew we wanted to get out of San Francisco.
Yeah, I think I don't know if we've talked about this, but I had done a few harvests. I had done like one full-on harvest in Oregon and then a few harvests in Europe, like just picking fruits, not a lot of processing. And I was personally, I think, dying to get back to like traveling a little bit and exploring like the larger wine world and getting my hands dirty. So I think that sort of came up as something that we could try to do together that would also allow us to get out of San Francisco and maybe eventually back to the East Coast. And
like, if I think the game plan was kind of like, we'll go do harvest. If it turns out that this is not really what we want to do, we can always move back to New York City and work in restaurants there. But if we are into it, I think from the get-go, the Finger Lakes were in the back of our heads because we poured a lot of Finger Lakes wines at Terroir. We were
really,
yeah.
Riesling,
yeah. We poured Thirsty Owl alongside, Becker and Julian Meyer, these kind of like titans of Alsace. And
for those of anybody who isn't sitting here, which is everybody who's listening to this, and they can't see, Alex is gesturing because Thirsty Owl is not far from here, right?
No, Thirsty Owl is literally our next door neighbors.
Yeah. So small world.
Yeah. So I think Finger Lakes was in the back of our minds for that, and because we wanted to be closer to our families, both being East Coasters, and there's not a whole ton of East Coast regions. I think we toyed with Niagara for a little bit, but there was an industry here where we could get jobs. So we left San Francisco in 2017. We went and worked in the Burgenland in Eastern Austria. So we literally lived in the last town before the Hungarian border in Austria.
Interesting.
We worked for a guy named Roland Valick, who makes the wines under the label Moritz, and he's kind of like the Blaufränkisch daddy, the Blaufränkisch master. So we did that harvest, went back home, kind of annoyed our parents for about 2 months, and then went to Australia and worked in custom crush facilities, 2 different separate custom crush facilities. I worked at a place called Lodestone, and Jules worked at a place called Revenir for a gentleman named Peter Lesky, a legend in Australian winemaking. And he also employed one Nathan Kendall.
Ah, anybody who doesn't know Nathan Kendall, he's on my list of people I would love to interview. Another well-known Finger Lakes winemaker making his own brand, and he's also making the wine for, I can't remember the winery.
Chapika. Yeah.
Chapika. Isn't he also related to like the
Hickory Hollow?
That's the one.
That's his family's winery.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
So we worked a harvest in Australia in the Adelaide Hills, which is sort of like one of the hotspots for natural wine in Australia, although we were working at these large custom crush places that did a little bit of natural winemaking, but was also, dump trunks of Grenache emptied out into fermenters, get your ads, get your yeast, that sort of vibe. So I feel like, the 2 experiences between Austria and Australia were very different, but both pretty important. Oh,
Australia was a big contrast to Austria because Roland, the guy that we worked for in Austria, was A, organic farming, B, like very minimal intervention winemaking. His wines are clean and classic and like up there with the greats of the world, but his technique is as pretty much as minimal intervention as you can get, with the exception of some sulfur. Like, he literally didn't even measure sugar.
Wow.
Until the fruit was in the cellar, he would just determine picking dates by taste.
Wow.
And I think we still kind of, like, it was very much a red wine production estate, and we still sort of think about red wine making the way that we learned it there, which is to say, like, extremely gentle. We're not trying to extract things and beat fruit up. We're always trying to sort of gently. I mean, there were some more ridiculous moments at Moritz where, like, Roland would, like, sensually push down the cap of the Blaufränkisch and be like, yeah.
With his body, presumably?
Yeah,
with his
like,
feet?
Roll up his sleeves and be like, "Ooh, you can feel a wet spot here." A wet spot, a hot spot, not a wet spot. In winemaking, it's all wet. All the spots are wet in winemaking.
Okay, interesting. So continue now in the direction of Usonia.
Yes.
If you would. Also, I just realized I never double checked. Usonia is the correct pronunciation.
It is, yes.
Okay.
Not Usonia, it's Usonia.
This is exactly why I asked.
Perfect. You're doing great. So yeah, we wrapped up harvest in Australia it would have been May of 2018. And then we moved to the Finger Lakes right after. So I was thinking about it. We're coming up on 7 years. I feel like we moved here June 1st of 2018.
June 1st?
Around then. I think it might be, yeah.
How lucky am I?
I know, right? 7 years exactly.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Happy anniversary.
So we moved here to the Finger Lakes. We didn't really have any connections. We knew Kim and Deborah of Bloomer Creek, and we had done a tasting at Forge before we went to Australia, so we kind of just reached out to both of them. Alex started working at Bloomer Creek in the vineyards. I started working at Forge, first in the vineyards and then a bit in the cellar, always with the idea that we wanted to start our own project, but we kind of just wanted to get our foot in the door first.
Got to start somewhere.
And we bought a little bit of fruit in 2018. Yeah, we can skip over this, but we bought 1 ton of Riesling, a ton of Riesling from Steve Shaw, and Chris Bates was generous enough to let us make it in his winemaking space, which at the time was in Arkport. So I guess 2018, in a sense, was our first real vintage, but we can forget about that wine.
No, let's say it was not.
It was not a real vintage. It was us futzing around in a cellar pretending.
Sure.
I think we did. I don't even want to say what we did. But so that was the first time we got fruit together. And then our first real vintage was 2020.
Yeah, in 2019, we bought a tiny amount of fruit again from Steve Shaw, and we made 1 Riesling. 2020 was the first year that we made more than a tank of wine, and that was just Riesling, Blaufränkisch, and Cab Franc. So at that time, we were making it at Steve Shaw's. Shout out to Steve Shaw, who, when you move to a region and you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and think you know everything about winemaking, it can be somewhat hard to, like, get your foot in the door. Understandably, most growers weren't even returning calls about fruit, but Steve Shaw took the time to sell us fruit and show us around his vineyard. And the following year, he let us make wine in his facility. And so, yeah, so we were at Steve Shaw's from 2019, 2020, and 2021. At the time, Jules was at Forge still. I worked for Bloomer Creek for it was like a year and a half or something. And then I went to work at the Cellar Door, a great shop in Ithaca.
Yeah, so I guess for our first few vintages at Steve's, I think when we moved to the Finger Lakes, we had just wrapped up harvest in Austria in like the region that specializes in Blaufränkisch. So we were super stoked to focus on Blaufränkisch, and we loved Riesling from our time at Terroir. So moving here, we were pretty gung-ho, like we're going to do Riesling and Blaufränkisch. think maybe Cab Franc was on our radar, but not super.
I think Cab Franc was on our list almost begrudgingly. Not for any particular reason. It was, I think we kind of came in, I'm like sort of embarrassed to think back to how sort of optimistic and like clueless we were, but I think we were like, Central European varieties. Let's make Blaufränkisch. Let's plant Tokai Friulano and Ribolla Gialla and ferment. And I think it pretty quickly became clear that we had no idea what we were talking about. We didn't really know what the climate was like here in the Finger Lakes.
I mean, I think everybody is guilty of that to some degree. You have to realize that you don't know and like have those opportunities to be able to gain the knowledge. And, I think it actually must have worked for you to some degree because I think it's true what some people say about like, there's always plenty of reasons not to do something. And so you really have to have it in your heart, even if in retrospect you feel like it was ignorant or you were out of your depth without kind of knowing it, to be able to use that as a jumping off point. And obviously you're at a point where it has led to your success. So kudos. And, I think that, I guess I'm just saying that I think that it worked for you.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
And you're the only people in the region making Tokai Friulano wine, which is something which we can come back to because I'm going to ask you about all of your interesting wines. Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah, I think when we moved here and we're convinced we knew a lot of things, we thought, oh, well, Central Europe is kind of cold. The Finger Lakes is cold. And that's sort of true. But I feel like the prevailing characteristic of the Finger Lakes is more like the humidity than the cold climate. And so for the first few years, we only worked with Riesling, Cabernet Franc, Blaufränkisch. We worked with Tokai Friulano in 21. But 2021, I think we always say is like the first year that feels like we were a real winery because it was the year that we bought the vineyard. So the vineyard that we now work with and own used to be Randolph O'Neill, which was owned by Kelly and Angela O'Neill. Planted to Cabernet Franc, mostly Cabernet Franc, a little bit of Riesling, mostly in 2005.
It was you who planted it, or when you purchased it, it was planted like that?
Yes. So Kelly planted it back in 2005. By the time 2021 rolled around, he wanted to retire and get out of the business. And this was January 2021, and we had no idea what was in store for the rest of the vintage. So it felt like a really great year to buy a vineyard. We took over the vineyard that winter and started farming our own vineyard, which was a huge lesson. And
did you say how big it was?
It's about 3.5 acres.
Okay.
Which is a lot. It's a lot. I think that in our minds we're like, that's a small vineyard. It's totally manageable for 2 people, and that is.
Yeah. If you want to learn how little you know, go work in a vineyard for 1.5 years and then buy a vineyard.
I know that I need more vineyard experience, and I'm terrified to do it.
Yeah, it's it is incredibly humbling. I think part of my goal with Bloomer Creek, or not goal, but like I think part of the reason that I felt comfortable no longer or like moving on from there was I was like, oh, I've been here for 1.5 years. I've seen what you prune and then you tie down and then you thin shoots and then you're like, I know how it goes, but it's like, but being the decision maker on a farm is such a radically different state of mind, and like learning how to prioritize. I think farming is largely a process of like learning what crisis needs to be addressed most quickly.
And in 2021, there were many crises. So the year that we took over the vineyard was a catastrophically wet year in the Finger Lakes.
It is notorious at this point.
Notorious.
I think everybody that I've done an interview with has said, shared some painful experience of theirs from that vintage.
Yeah.
but such high yields.
We did have so many grapes.
Much rotting fruit. It was really, yeah. So yeah, that was the year that we took over the vineyard. And I think after we wrapped up harvest, I think hybrids were sort of always in the back of our minds. We didn't really think too much about them, but they were sort of on our radar. And having spent...
I think we like straight up poo-pooed hybrids for the first 2 years.
I think many people do.
Yeah, and we came here to like make vinifera wine. Everything you read about hybrids from established sources or older sources says that they don't make interesting wine. So why would you believe differently? We worked for Forge and Steve Shaw and Bloomer Creek, who, God love them all. They all are like really invested in vinifera. But I think farming our own land, and I think the sort of like negative side of seeing just how rough grown grapes can be here, and also sort of the positive side of like getting to know the land and like feel a stronger sense of responsibility towards it. And like, I think prior to owning a vineyard, we were sort of like, oh, well, if we can farm organically, that's nice. If not, who gives a shit? But I think as, you spend time out in the vineyard and like, you see the same birds every day and like a deer comes up to you in the middle of the year. Yeah. We both started to feel a kind of like almost a sense of obligation to sort of try to carve out a path of farming that we felt was as sustainable as possible while still maintaining economic sustainability.
Interesting.
I'm going to pass this off to you because I ran out of things.
So yeah, I don't know what I don't want to say a spark, but after the harvest in year of 2021, I think we are more intrigued by hybrid varieties. So 2022, things started to shift, and we bought Cayuga White for the first time from like just up the road. At the time, it was owned by the Challens of Cayuga Ridge, and the vineyard that it's coming from is actually the first planting of Cayuga White anywhere in New York. So like anywhere in the world, because it was bred at Cornell.
I read that on your website. Yeah. That is a super interesting little tidbit.
Yeah, it was planted by Bob and Mary Plain, I want to say in 72, 73. And yeah, so it's an older vineyard for the Finger Lakes. And we worked with the fruit. That was we got a little bit of Treminette that year too, I think. But that was our first like dipping our toe into the world of hybrids. And since then, we've really kind of, I don't want to say totally pivoted, because we still grow Riesling and Cabernet Franc, and we still work with a lot of vinifera varieties. But I feel like we really are increasingly excited about hybrids to the point where we've been planting them in our vineyard, like amongst the Cabernet Franc and Riesling.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting as how everybody kind of phrased it, because it does not make sense.
Interspersed in the same rows?
Interspersed in the same rows. So when we took over the vineyard, there were a fair amount of dead spots, which happens in vineyards. And there's also this lovely little dip right in the middle where vines tend to die. And I think originally we were like, oh, we'll just, replant Riesling where Riesling has been grown, and same with Cabernet Franc. But we had the kind of crazy idea to put hybrids where those vines have died, which I think most people would say doesn't make sense in terms of the trellising system and the spray programs. Mm-hmm. But for us, we kind of, I think, made a decision that we wouldn't put vinifera in the ground.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you're like, the way that your moral obligation has changed your winemaking philosophy, and the approach that you have for your business has gone so far that you're not planting vinifera where there were some, and instead choosing to go the hybrid direction.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
And we want to make clear that this might be a moral obligation for us. We do not believe it's a moral obligation for other people, that we are not. I suspect we'll...
To be fair, those are my words, not yours. I kind of put those in your mouth.
So, I think we'll always work with vinifera. We work with some incredible growers. And some of the growers that we've worked with have talked about, wanting to put more vines in the ground, and they only want to put vinifera in. So, of course, we're going to, support them in those endeavors. But yeah, for us on our land, I think we want to really sustainability is like the ultimate quote unquote sustainability. I think that's the most abused term in farming, but yeah, sustainability is the most important aspect when approaching really almost any decision. I do also want to shout out in our like sort of conversion to hybrids, winemakers like Deirdre Heeken and Camilla at La Montanuela in Vermont and North American Press in California. You know, like once we started sort of like seeking out hybrid wine rather than sort of just like tasting whatever came our way, I think we learned quickly that hybrids can produce incredible wines, even if they sort of speak in a different register from vinifera.
I see. These are people making high quality hybrid wines, you're saying?
Yeah. And I kind of realized this after the fact, but I think for both of us, we like kind of, some of our favorite wines are Italian wines. It's a very general concept, but like the way that I learned wine was that like the grape itself is not important, but you know, you can only grow certain grapes in certain regions. And I think the thing that can be confusing for a lot of people is like, oh, the region is on the label. And you know that, well, I guess Fiano isn't a good example. No, I'm not going to think of any example. Chianti, like it's Sangiovese is made in Chianti. But there's certain like obscure grapes that only grow in certain places, like Susu Maniello in Puglia. And it's just native to that region. While hybrids aren't exactly the same analog, I think, got more excited about making something that is distinctive to the place rather than another imitation of a grape that is grown elsewhere.
That is a very interesting perspective.
Yeah. Like, I was always into indigenous varieties from obscure places, and while we're not doing the exact same thing, that's sort of what we're chasing. Yeah,
it's interesting to consider that. I mean, people talk about sense of place and terroir and how it's reflected in the ultimate wine, but talking about native varieties, I mean, in some ways it's more true that they're distinctive of their place. I mean, they're native.
Yeah, totally. And I think that gets back to Paul Greco at Terroir. You know, we were pouring Blanc Frankish in 2012 and Greco de Tufo, like kind of things that for at the time were pretty crazy. And then also we both drank and sommed in sort of Italian focused restaurants where, you know, pouring Burgundy, pouring Pinot Noir is just like simply not on the table. So you can either fight against that or you can kind of like come around to the idea that like maybe Cesanese from Lazio can be as grand as Pinot Noir, maybe in a different history or a different past. If things had shaken out differently, it would be Ribolla Gialla planted all over California instead of Chardonnay.
Sure.
And so I think like coming to prize the match of grape to place over the inherent qualities of the grape was really key in our sort of conversion to hybrids.
If I can just take a moment to say, I think that that's very interesting, and I think that what I know about Usonia, to hear you describe this seems more and more clear, having kind of seeing the space and understanding a little bit better your relationship with the wines. You know, when I was perusing the website, if I can give you my perspective on the hybrid thing and how, from my perspective, you kind of fit into the big picture. It's easy to see hybrid wines and to just assume that somebody's like fitting them in where they can, you know, or they're, you know, whatever, to not expect very much out of them. I think that from a more new age perspective, maybe it's becoming more and more interesting to see hybrids, especially ones you have some listed in some of your wines that I don't know that I've ever heard the name of. I don't know if Chalois is a hybrid, but we can get to it because I'm going to ask you about these wines. But just as an example, it's one of the things that I think is really kind of intriguing about what you're doing. And I will also just take this opportunity to say that Alex and Julia are pouring their Pompliano Pink, which is a wine that I have written down here, which I want to ask you about. And
we would love to talk about this.
Tell me really quickly, and then I'll try and wrap up and get back to what you were talking about. What's in this wine? The varieties?
So this is Pompliano Pink is the name that we gave it. It's a variety called Steuben.
Steuben.
So it's 100% Steuben, which, as far as we know, is an older hybrid bred in the 20s. I feel like when I looked it up, it's a cross of Wayne and Sheridan.
Interesting.
Don't quote me on that, but not that. Very noble. Very noble progeny. But the way that this wine came about is in 2023. There's the Cornell Classifieds where, come August, everybody's listing all the fruit they have for sale. And there was one listing by a guy named Corey Christie, and he has a small farm out in Naples, and he farms a bunch of different hybrids or a few different hybrids biodynamically. And he listed Steuben and Sabrevois, and we had never heard of either variety, but the fact that they were being biodynamically farmed kind of piqued our interest. So we reached out to him. He was like, great, they're yours. You were the first one that offered to buy them. The deer got to them before Corey could get to them. Biodynamic deer, yeah.
The deer, as I understand, have very good taste,
yes.
so it's maybe a good sign.
Also, I think Steuben, we now know, is a variety that is actually like delicious to eat just on its own. So the following year, we had extra nets, so we kind of reached out to Corey and said, like, if we give you our nets, can we get first dibs on the fruit? So Alex helped him set up nets one day. We got the fruit. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we got both varieties from Steuben and Sabrevois. So Pompliano Pink is 100% Steuben. We got a very small amount of it. We'd only wound up making 1 barrel. It's it looks like, it's a pink grape. I mean, it looks like Pinot Gris if Pinot Gris were less kind of brown. It's like very like rose colored as a variety. We saw 1 day of skin contact. And then I destemmed it and then did 1 day of skin contact.
It's got good color for 1 day.
And I don't really remember how we decided it should be 1 day and not 10. But I do think we had read that the full macerations can be a little quote unquote foxy. We're happy to discuss what foxy means to us if you want to get into it. But so I think we kind of wanted to just we wanted color. We wanted some of these flavors from the skins, but try to limit that quote-unquote foxiness. Pressed, and then went into a small stainless steel tank, fermented dry. We did farm a small portion of our vineyard biodynamically last year, but the way that Corey's fruit fermented is what really convinced me that there's merit to A, organic farming, and B, biodynamics. It was unstopped. This fermentation was crazy. It was it maybe lasted 7 days. It came at peak harvest. The cellar's full. It was in a VC on a pallet, and it was constantly in the way. So I would be moving it outside. It would be up to 70 degrees outside one day, and then I would move it inside, and then I would move it out the next day, and it would be 40 degrees that day. Temperature changes didn't matter. The thing just kept chugging along, and it was done in 10 days. The red fruit in the vineyard, the Sabrevois, was a whole cluster, 100% whole cluster fermentation, went dry in 5 days. Just the healthiest.
Did you say these are spontaneous?
Yes. Yeah. So this wine is fully quote unquote 0-0. So nothing is added to it and nothing's removed. So there's no sulfur.
Wow.
And so, these were just the fastest, healthiest fermentations I think I've ever seen. I literally got distracted and didn't even rack this off the
heavy leaves.
The heavy leaves, yeah.
From the press. The press leaves.
Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't have time.
But it didn't get weird.
Nope. It was just.
it smelled like beets for like about a week. And we were like, this is really weird. And then that kind of blew off. And I feel like it smelled like this for the last, since always.
Well, I want to ask you a couple more like production questions about this wine, but let me wrap up really quickly my what I'm trying to get at here, which is I am somebody who in the past, I try to be open, and modest and considerate, but I'm certainly somebody in the past who has found myself mentally poo-pooing to some degree the use of hybrids, or at least putting...
Get out.
At least, my inclination is to put most high vinifera varieties to presume that they're going to make better wines. But to taste this wine, like, it's impossible, it feels like, to have that thought and then drink a wine like this, because this wine is like nuanced and delicate and sexy and is like, to me, not foxy at all. Even though especially there's been some, skin contact, and to me it's like very grapefruity and spicy, and this wine is fascinating. And so I guess my intention is just to wrap up and say the hybrid thing, I think you guys are killing, and to me makes a lot of your winemaking decisions and stuff particularly intriguing in a way that not many other people touch, because to some degree you can only have so many like slam and shards and Rieslings and blah, blah, blah in the world. But these like co-ferments that you're doing and, all these funny varieties that I am totally unfamiliar with, at least, really grabs the shit out of me. So this is my, my commercial for Usonia. People who are listening to this and thinking like, wow, this guy sounds so smart and like he knows what he's talking about. Come drink this wine, because at least the two examples that we've had so far have been stellar.
Thanks. These are actually wines from Austria that have had Usonia labeled. No.
You just put in the bottle and lied about it.
No, I think you're totally right that one of the things that you quickly realize about hybrids is that they have had such a long history of having this reputation for not making good wine that people couldn't but make them in a kind of like cast off manner that was not going to result in good wine. I will say that we have made some hybrids that are not good, and it's like, oh, that just tastes like a hybrid red. It tastes like meaty cardboard. It's very strange.
Yeah, this conversation probably comes with an amount of nuance, variety, and thoughtful winemaking and blending where it's appropriate and things like that.
We've also made really bad Riesling.
Well, that's certainly possible. I know for a fact. Anyway, okay. Well, thank you for letting me get that off my chest, because we were talking about hybrids and I was like, I have to tell them how great they are. Okay, Pompiano Pink. Will you say again, your website says 00. That just means 0 things added total, not even sulfur.
Yes, so we have done nothing to this wine. So the fruit was brought in, native yeast ferments. I would say with most of our wines, we add a little bit of sulfur at crush. But we did not do that in this case. So fermented based on the fruit was beautifully clean. We're always we really like to drink 00 wines. We've tried to make some in the past and it can be really tricky. So we're always a little bit cautious when we do it.
Jules is more cautious than I am.
I have a full-time job. But in this instance, we knew it was a small lot of pristine fruit. So we're like, let's give it a shot.
To hear 00, I've tasted enough wine that is made in a traditional sense, like not necessarily a minimal intervention sense, that the finished wine ends up tasting like the barrel was left untopped for a period of time, like kind of filmy, kind of musty. And when I hear 00, or I know a wine has, no sulfur added, it's easy to assume that you're going to be able to to taste that like slight influence of oxidation or something like that. And you would never know drinking this wine. This wine is like as fresh as the day it was born.
Yeah. It's, I think for us, working the way that we work, trying to move to ever lower sulfur levels and being as hands off as we can means you're working harder, but just differently. And you do all of your work during harvest. And then you're doing everything you can, at least in our context. We top our barrels off all the time. So for this one, yes, we added nothing, but we were very cautious, I would say. So we taste it once a month when we top, but that was it.
So they spent some time in barrels?
So yeah, it was in a VC where it fermented. It went dry, and then we realized it was pretty much exactly a barrel's worth. So we were like, let's put it in a barrel. So we moved it into barrel. Neutral barrel. We kept it topped up, and then I racked it once before bottling, and that was it.
Unfiltered.
Unfiltered, yeah.
It's quite clear.
Super clear. Yeah.
It must have settled well.
I think it settled pretty well in the VC before we racked it, but even the barrel looked pretty clean.
But I don't see anything in the bottom of the bottle.
There are no bits in this bottle. I'm pretty stoked about that.
I was going to come and, we'll still have the conversation
we
about,
have plenty of
I'm going to
wine
ask you to make an argument for unfiltered.
Let's go.
And then you poured this wine and I was like, crap, it's clear.
Yeah, no, we got bits in other bottles, but no, this one, again, maybe it's a one-off, but I really do think like the fruit itself, the quality of the farming, it has just behaved more beautifully than we've ever seen any other fruit. And not to be like a wine nerd, because neither of us is like super chemistry or science oriented, but like the numbers were perfect. It was like hybrids can have like a really high TA, but also really high pH. And I feel like that's where you run into trouble. And this was like super low pH and a high TA, but not like screaming high TA. It went through mallow. So we were in a position, I mean, we don't really filter any of our wines, but numbers wise, we felt really comfortable with not doing anything to it.
Yeah, doing a 0-0 wine like this, mallow must be important, I would think, because it's the one bit of stability that you need to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So this went through mallow. I don't know that I would ever know. I mean, the acid is still there.
It's still like searing, but also like palatable, I feel. Like it feels refreshing.
I think the balance is great for this, which is reminding me, I don't want to get too far down the wine track. Minimal. Your website indicates that you identify as minimal intervention winemakers, growers, winemakers. If you would just hit me with like, I kind of feel like minimal intervention maybe means different things to different people, or people have a misconception of broadly what it means to everybody. So insofar as Usonia and growing winemaking is concerned, will you hit me with how your philosophy relates to that minimal intervention buzz phrase?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's very poorly defined, or there are many definitions of it, I should say. And we use it because we don't want to use the even more poorly defined category of natural wine. I mean, to us, natural wine isn't poorly defined at all. For us, natural wine is organically farmed, nothing added except for sulfur, and that should be extremely low, ideally like 25 parts or lower total.
Wow.
We don't work with exclusively organic fruit, and our sulfurs can sometimes reach 45 or 50 parts total, so we don't call our wines natural. That doesn't mean other people don't call our wines natural. Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. Yeah, we got brightly colored labels.
This is a perfect time to say, I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, Usonia has a really cool look, and I'm going to take a picture of their label and put it on their Instagram or on the East Coast Winemaking Instagram so you can see it, because it's worth taking a look at. Thanks.
So yeah, to us, minimal intervention basically means no fining or filtration. Fermentations are spontaneous, both primary and malolactic, and we keep sulfurs as low as possible. We don't have like a number that is like the threshold for us, but I think we've crossed 50 parts total like twice.
Does that mean you're not adding any at press? Any SO2?
We have, I think, when did we start that? I feel like when we first started in our first few vintages, we did not add sulfur at crush. And then we started that probably in 21.
Maybe is it lot dependent?
It's lot dependent. I would say for the most part, we do add sulfur at crush. It's usually 15 parts. In certain instances, like with the Steuben, we didn't add anything.
Oh yeah, you said it was perfect.
Yeah. Neither of us can taste mouse. So adding a little bit of sulfur at crush kind of lets us sleep easier at nights. So generally we do 10 to 15 parts at crush, and then we'll do 15 to 20 after mallow.
When you say mouse, is that like a lactic acid bacteria that makes that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I feel
but
like there's
your concern is just like if things are allowed to thrive due to the like lack of presence of SO2, you might end up with some off flavors.
Yeah, I mean, this is funny because, well, in like the natural wine world, mouse is like ultra prevalent, and it's a specific flaw. It's it literally smells like or tastes like a dirty mouse cage.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently,
like the rodent section at like a pet store.
Exactly, but it's not. The aromas aren't volatile at higher pHs, so you can't smell it. Or sorry, they're not volatile at lower pHs, so you can't smell it. You only experience it retronasally once you've tasted the wine.
Interesting.
And I think because of that pH dependency, something like 20% of the population can't detect it at all. We are both in that 20%.
I don't know that I've ever sensed it, but I don't know that I've ever been put in the opportunity to.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think the reason it's become such a bugbear for the natural wine world is it's very prevalent, probably because of like climate related changes, but also like what most people would consider very low levels of sulfur will knock it out. So if the wine has seen 10 or 15 parts after mallow, like shortly after mallow, mouse, as far as I understand it, almost cannot develop. So it's almost only plagues wines that are totally sulfur free.
Okay, but it can develop post-fermentation.
Yes. And in fact, I think that it's almost like Brett in that way that like it's more of an élevage flaw than a fermentation flaw.
Interesting.
So yeah, since neither of us can taste it, we always do, or almost always do, 15 parts after mallow, and then we'll do 15 or 20 prior to bottling. It depends on kind of how we feel about the wine, where the pH is at, if there's anything on our radar from during élevage, and just sort of like general vibes about the wine. But we don't have a number threshold, but I'll say that I think our goal is we want sulfur. I don't want sulfur. We want sulfur. Julia wants sulfur.
They're fighting over the mic.
Julia wants to take one.
Yeah. We want sulfur for its preservative properties. We never, ever want to be able to detect sulfur in the wine. So, yeah, we tend to keep it as low as we feel comfortable with.
Maybe now I can parlay this into, now that you've explained your relationship with minimal intervention, do you have like a why? Could you have just as easily been a more traditional quote unquote winery, or how early on in your vision of your brand did the minimal intervention portion of it exist, and what compels you to continue to going in that direction? Is it because it's I suppose I could.
It's a really great trend that we're chasing.
It's a hard trend to chase, I'll tell you what. It's got to make your lives harder.
I think, it definitely, I feel like not that any of this path has been easy, regardless of how you farm or make wine. But I think for both of us, it's kind of the wines that we have always drunk are lower intervention. Maybe not the wines that have spoken to us. We certainly have drunk our fair share of conventionally made wines, but the wines that we're most excited about are from usually smaller estates that are farming organically for the most part and are doing not a lot in the cellar. I think that's true from like day one when we met at Terroir. And I think when we moved here, we always had that ethos in mind. And I think we've since refined it as we've learned more over the years. And I will say this is our ethos, but we are not super diehard dogmatic about it. we have a business to run and bills to pay, and we have like sterile filtered a wine that had whatever 5 grams of sugar. We know like we have to do that in that context, but in every other opportunity, we want to be as hands off as we can. So I think that's always the wines that have spoken to us. And also I think like now that we've been doing this for a few years, farming and making wine, it's kind of how we want to spend our time. Like we would much rather be in the vineyard, anxious working in the vineyard. And I feel like we really enjoy the rhythm of cellar work when we make the wines that we do, and that you make the wine during harvest time. And from November until bottling, you're in the cellar once a month. You taste the wines. If you need to, you top the wines, and that's about it. You get ready and you blend when you're ready to bottle. But as a person who loves to do cellar work, I don't really want to be spending all of my time in the cellar. I'd rather be outside helping Alex farm if we can. And yeah, those are the wines that we enjoy drinking. And futzing around in the cellar is just not what we think of as like the wines that speak of a place.
Sure.
And I think that a lot of cellar practices, basically every cellar practice, there's some trade-off. You're always, generally what you're gaining is predictability and stability. But I do think that you can lose elements of, I guess I would say like uniqueness and the human touch. If you emphasize stability and predictability too much, I will say that there are, not just from the Finger Lakes, but from all over the world, I've had wines that are over-sulfured, completely over-filtered, and indistinguishable from one another. And
interesting.
You can't detect, there are wines that are so manipulated you can't detect the variety, much less the place, and certainly not the person who made it. And I think it's a word we want to intervene until it's just predictable enough that we aren't like pulling our hair out with anxiety, and that's where we stop.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. The next, so I have a list of wines here that stood out to me as ones that might be good ones to talk about some of your cellar practices and wine styles in general. The first one that I have, now that we've already discussed the Pompliano Pink, is a wine called Good Spirit. Actually, I also wanted to say, check out Usonia's website, because they have some wine names that make me want to drink the wine almost as much as reading about them. I'm just going to read the short list that I have here. Good Spirit, West, West, West. This is a variety, but it's sexy. Takai Friulano.
Also, props to anybody who actually gets that pun. West, West, West.
I don't get it.
Yeah, I feel like it's an Italian wine nerd shit, but I feel like we will send you a bottle if you understand the pun, because we thought it was clever and nobody understands it.
My personal favorite, who, whom, and change the weather or change your mind. There were others, but those are just the couple of ones that I wrote down.
Whom was Vladimir Ilyich Lenin's ultimate political question.
Really?
Who will dominate whom? Trotsky shortened it to
I wrote this
whom.
down, hybrids or vinifera, who will dominate whom?
Precisely. Yeah.
Makes me want to drink the wine. So, Good Spirit. It says on the website, co-fermented red and white varieties, 40% Baca Noir, 40% Chalois, and 20% Traminette. So if you could tell me a little bit about the wine, and then one of the things especially that I specifically want to ask you that I am personally interested in is your feelings on the distinction between co-fermentation versus separate fermentation and then blending post-ferment. If you could just incorporate that at some point.
Good Spirit is from our friend, the fruit comes from our friends Mike and Rhea. They own Rhea's Wines on Seneca Lake. Mike once said to me, if you want to make good wine, you have to have Good Spirit, hence the name. So they bought this vineyard, I guess just last year.
God, no pressure.
Yeah.
You said that and I was like, do I have Good Spirit?
Yeah,
I know, yes. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are especially like biodynamic growers, especially in France, who are like, I don't enter the vineyard unless I'm feeling good. So, damn, dude, I got work to do.
I was gonna say I'm gonna start calling my boss. Sorry.
Yeah. It's from their vineyard. It's 3 varieties. So the Baco was picked first, and fermented on its own. And then about 2 weeks later, the Treminette and Chalois were picked and co-fermented.
Is Chalois white or red variety?
Sorry, Chalois is red.
Okay.
So everything was 100% whole cluster. The Chalois and the Treminette fermented together in a stainless steel tank.
Does that mean stems included also?
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah. No crushing of anything. Cap management was very minimal. Just like pitchers of juice poured over the cap to keep it wet. And then...
That's a great idea. If I can just say, it sounds like the easiest pump over known to man.
Yes.
I hate doing pump overs on small volumes because to set up a
hate setting up
pump
a pump
and all that, just to pump over
crazy.
a ton or less or something like that can be a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
I'm totally getting a pitcher.
We'll often do pump overs. We'll often do like pump overs at the very start of fermentation to like really get things
some air
going.
in there, maybe?
Yeah. And then once it's going well, we will generally just do like pitchers, and then maybe we'll do one at like peak fermentation. A lot of our cap management, which is we almost never do punch downs because we want like very gentle extraction. Our cap management is, I would say, like more about fermentation management than ideally we would do nothing. Ideally we would destem, not crush the fruit. It would go into the fermenter and it would just kick off and ferment steadily, and we would never need to do any kind of cap management. I think that would be our ideal red fermentation. But generally we just keep track of sugar depletion and temperature and make a call about whether we want to pump it over or do pitchers. Almost always it turns out that we do 2 or 3 pump overs at the start and then we do pitchers.
I get yelled at when I suggest one final pump over at peak ferment, and then I get like texts from Alex being like, did you pump it over today or did you do a pitcher? And then we move into pitchering.
This would have fermented until it was quote unquote dry. I say quote unquote because there's so many whole clusters that when you press it, it winds up pressing off pretty sweet. Would have gone into stainless to finish, and then the Baco and the Chalois were blended. The Baco, the Chalois, Treminette were all blended in a stainless steel tank, and then barreled down to roughly 50-50 Nutrabarrel and steel barrels. Regarding co-fermentation versus blending, we don't have enough. I don't think we've done enough like controlled experiments to sort of speak to how it functions. It's not like we've ever fermented Chalois and Treminette separately and then blended them and seen how that comes out. I think I don't know where I heard this or why I have it in my head, but one of the things that I've learned or think is that the varieties, if you blend them, varieties have a little bit more distinctive qualities. Like, if you blended Merlot and Pinot or something, one day it might smell like Merlot, one day it might smell like Pinot. It'll go through waves. But if you co-fermented them, you'd get a little bit more of like a muddle.
They integrate better, maybe?
They might integrate better, but could also be the downside of like you might get none of the positive aspects of either variety.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think the Chalois and Treminette co-ferment was the first time we actually co-fermented anything. I feel like for the last few years, we've always wanted to do co-ferments, and then it's purely just a logistic of like, oh, well, this variety comes in mid-September, and the other variety you wanted to co-ferment is mid-October. I feel like we've done a lot of weird blends, but they've all been everything vinified separately and then blended after the fact. Or we'll do bad wine re-fermented with the following year wine, which is not really a co-ferment.
Well, certainly,
or it could be a co-ferment.
Certainly, it's easy to imagine that in order to be able to co-ferment anything, either to do it or whether you're going to do it or not, is in part a logistics consideration. You have to have both grapes basically at the same time, ready to go.
But I also feel like with Treminette, that might be like the one exception to what you were just saying, whereas like, Treminette is so distinctive and floral that like 20% of Treminette in an actual co-ferment, like you're not going to lose those aromatics. So like that wine itself does have like a kiss of the floral quality that we really like. And it's just a fun little, I think, charming hybrid wine.
What's Chalois like as a variety?
We'll never know because they tore it out.
From what I gather, it's pretty neutral.
Okay.
I think probably in the like kind of chancellery realm of like, it's a hybrid red.
Okay.
Yeah, I have never tasted a Chalois on its own.
If people are interested to taste these wines and they come to your tasting space here, they're available.
Yep. Whenever you come, you pay $15. You can taste. We usually do 6 wines, and then usually there's a little extra in there, and you will always taste with one of us. Shameless plug, we do kind of like do the tastings the way that we've always enjoyed visiting winemakers, which is you taste with the winemaker themselves, and you have a normal conversation. Yeah.
Is it res only?
Yes, so we do it by reservation only just because we have other things
lives.
to do. Yeah, we've got lives, and that way we can sort of manage our time. But I will say, like, our phone number is on the website. If there's a time that you're in town that you can't, you can text or call Alex. Whether he'll respond is up in the air, but like you can always email us, and we try to be as accommodating as we can.
Sure.
And if their car's here and you walk in and we got space, we'll always say yes.
And you can mention that you heard them on the podcast to get on their good side right from the get-go.
Exactly, yes. Maybe a discount.
The next wine that I wanted to ask you about, West.
Ooh.
This, I learned something new today, which is that crackling wine is a TTB-approved term. Do you want to hit me with that?
Everybody should be labeling their wines as crackling wine. No. So the wine itself... in 2023, we had the really bad frost. We kind of said yes to a bunch of varieties, so we got a few hybrids, Chancellor, Cayuga White, and Verdelais, and we kind of vinified everything separately, blended them together. We're briefly excited about that wine before we realized it was not very good. So Alex had the idea.
In what way, would you say?
Like... pretty characterless. It was always kind of reductive. I hate to say like Chancellor is kind of a boring hybrid, but from our experience, Chancellor was just like red fruit and not a lot of other positive. Yeah, we also like we could have made it a lot better. So the wine itself was pretty one-dimensional, boring, reductive, characterless.
Sounds like a good base wine.
Great base wine. It was also a high pH. But we thought if we made it sparkling, it could be fun.
Sparkling makes everything better.
Yes, we've quickly learning this. So Alex had the idea of adding fermenting juice the next year. So we bought some Diamond from Ria's. Diamond is a native variety. So we got like half a ton of Diamond, got that fermentation started, pitched it into the still wine from 23, and then bottled under pressure. And yeah, it worked. There was a brief moment where we didn't know if we had added everything at the exact right time, but we got bubbles. We disgorged it over the winter, and we made sparkling wine, and we were like ready to put sparkling wine on the label. But when we were checking the TTB guidelines, we saw that crackling wine was an option of what you can call your wine. And I think the only requirement is it has to have less pressure than champagne.
Which is pretty high. Like 6 bars or something.
So I was like, oh my God, we could call this crackling wine. And then I Googled it, and Hosmer also labels wine as crackling wine.
Oh,
so
really?
They do. I want to say it's Cayuga White. I'm not sure, but it's a thing that you can... Yeah, it's the only other one that we're aware of. But in our mind...
I had never heard of it before.
Crackling wine is so much more appetizing than sparkling wine. So yeah, we labeled it crackling wine. TTB approved it, and that's it.
Well, the production method, I think, is fascinating, and also I've never heard of before. Taking a base wine basically from the year prior, adding fermenting juice the next year, and then using that as being like your fermentation, CO2 creating culture to then bottle into. Not to mention Diamond, the way that you describe the base wine, Diamond has a lot of personality, as I understand. So maybe it
Diamond fixes everything.
It was a
Really.
match
You got like
made
a
in heaven.
boring, reductive wine, add a little foxy diamond, you are good to go.
Interesting. And it also said it was inspired by Refermentado sparkling wine, which also was a name that I was unaware of.
So this is how, as I understand it, this is how Lambrusco, traditional Lambrusco is made, and how all Lambrusco used to be made, or sort of like the sparkling wines of central Italy, that they would go through a year of élevage before they would add the next year's juice and then bottle
Interesting.
it. Yeah, and I think, it's intriguing. I mean, champagne, it goes through élevage most of the time. They just add a liqueur de tirage and sugar, but adding the next year's juice is just like sort of the poor man's way of doing that, I guess.
Yeah, interesting. So you said you disgorged it, which means it's probably mostly quite clear.
Mostly, depending on Alex's technique at that particular moment of that day.
Did you disgorge like a la volée without freezing?
Yeah. So we did it in January and February. So we would stick the wine outside, bring it in, and just do it by hand.
Like turn it and pop it.
Turn it and
so
pop it.
If I can just describe for anybody who is unfamiliar with these techniques, a lot of disgorging that happens in modern times, the bottles are upside down and the sediment is at what is the top of the bottle, but in this case it's upside down where the opening is. And a neck freezer is used to freeze an amount of wine at the opening of the bottle, and the bottle is turned upright and popped, and the carbonation that's in the bottle shoots the chunk of ice out, and in the ice is the ice is like encapsulating the solids. What I understand is kind of the old-fashioned way, I guess, before this technology was around, or I've heard it called à la volée before, and that's when you can't freeze the tip of the bottle, and so you still have the sediment down at the tip like usual, and the bottle is upside down, and you basically just have to turn the bottle upright and get the timing right as kind of the bubble, rises to the tip to not let any of that sediment fall back down and pop at the right time, so you end up with, maybe some bottles that are slightly more or less like disgorged, as it were. And then did you add any dosage, or then did you just cork, or is it under crown cap? Or cork?
It's under crown cap. We just disgorged and then topped up with the wine itself and then capped it.
Super cool.
Yeah,
that's a wine that I'll have to set a reservation time to come taste, but I'm interested to try that one. So Tokai Friulano, to move next. Another shout out. I was at a local business called Once today. That's like a regional tasting room that has some Usonia wines, a number of other wineries, including some John Albert wine, Cab Franc available now. And one of the wines that they have is your Tokai Friulano. Tell me a little bit about that. As I understand, there's only one planting of it in the Finger Lakes. You get it. It's from a winery called Ventosa, right? And you had mentioned your interest in this variety as you were talking about your how you got into winemaking and all that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I guess starting with our interest in the variety, we love to drink it. We love the wines of Friuli, where it's not from Friuli, but it's most at home there. So this is northeastern Italy, kind of near the Adriatic coast, near Trieste. And the soil that they have there is called ponca. It's more sandstone based, but it looks very much like shale. So I think when we moved here, that was kind of part of the reason that we were thinking Central European varieties, Friulian varieties. And we tasted Ventosa's Tokai before we ever bought fruit from them. And they make wine completely differently from the way that we do, but nonetheless, it felt sort of Friulian in a way that I would say Rieslings here don't necessarily feel Alsatian or German. So yeah, in 2021, I think somehow we became aware that they might have some Tokai for sale, and we bothered them, and they sold it to us.
Going back to how garbage a year 2021 was, it rained and rained and rained. The cleanest, ripest fruit, and this would have been clean and ripe in even a good year, was the Tokai Friulano from Ventosa.
Do you get the feeling that it's particularly resistant and well-suited to vintages like that?
I think it probably, for vinifera, is somewhat more resistant. I also think their vineyard manager, whose name is Roberto, if I'm not mistaken, is
Just killing it.
super talented. It's conventionally farmed as far as we know, but we've worked with it for 3 years, and like cleanliness, ripeness, and like the condition of the fruit has never been an issue.
So yeah, the original goal was to make a fall bore orange wine, because we didn't have an orange wine at that time, and Tokai is often used to make an orange wine in Friuli. So we destemmed it, beat the shit out of it. Not really. I mean, probably punch it down once or twice a day.
To try and increase extraction, you mean?
Yeah. So I guess that's actually probably one of the odd things about the way we make wine. The only wines that we really punch down religiously are skin contact whites. The color never turned orange. We're not totally sure why. One of the theories is that Tokai is a very reductive variety, and skins turning quote unquote orange, or the wine turning orange, is obviously a process of oxidation. So that reductive quality of Tokai probably sort of bolsters it against the oxidation that would actually turn the color. So it just kind of turns like a golden color. But the skins definitely add not real tannin, maybe a touch of bitterness, but real like luscious texture to it. And then élevage has changed over the past few years. Like everything in a cellar our size, it is as much logistical as it is philosophical. So there's always some element of barrel aging, but I don't think it's ever been above a third, maybe. And yeah, it's kind of an odd wine. The acid is low. I think TA is maybe 5.5.
Interesting.
And pHs can be 3.75, 3.8. And so that is one of the wines where our sulfurs can get up to 50, 55 parts, because we're scared. We're so scared. And yeah, it's a real like white wine of texture, which is like, it's not like we love drinking like Rhone whites or something, but we don't really get to make a lot of white wines that are like a textural experience here in the Finger Lakes. Our wines tend to be pretty high acid and linear, so it's a cool little thing to do.
Yeah, it is an interesting wine. I had written these notes before I went to Once today and tasted. And once I saw that wine was available, I knew that I had to try it because I was coming here to speak with you all about it. And I had written down that the 2023 vintage spent 3 weeks on the skins. And when I was tasting it, I didn't have that in my mind. And it did not at all strike me. When I hear 3 weeks on skins, I get a little worried because I've had some experiences where like the phenolic intensity just becomes like a little too much, like great wines have good texture. But sometimes certainly there's such a thing as like too much, or, like it just gets a little, like you have to have it with food. It gets a little intense. You know what I mean? And what stood out to me about that wine, was the like luscious weight, like you described it. It's like so round, that that's what stood out to me. And I suppose in my experience and in hearing what you're saying about the skin contact, that's where it shows to me. Yeah, really cool wine. And a finished malolactic fermentation.
Yes.
That was noted on the website. I'm probably going to bring it up for every white wine that we talk about. I'm not used to seeing Riesling that finishes mallow and stuff like that, but we also started this tasting with Riesling, your 2023 Riesling, I think it was, and that also finished mallow. And before I've had a lot of experiences with the opportunity to taste Riesling that's gone through malolactic, I always think like, oh, it must do something really interesting. I don't know that I would ever know, tasting this wine.
Yeah.
It doesn't like... it doesn't feel like Chardonnay-y, there's no like secondary aroma or something that really sticks out.
Yeah, it's been my personal experience that Riesling, if you're not using cultured yeast and you're not having a super fast fermentation, it will go through mallow. And you're not controlling temperature. So for the 2023, this was even a faster fermentation. I want to say it was dry by Thanksgiving, so a month and a half. We don't use any temperature control for our Riesling. That said, it never gets super hot.
How big are the lots that you're fermenting?
I mean, the Riesling is 2 tons, so yeah, it's like 11 hectoliters.
Okay.
Sorry, we work in hectoliters. So the lots are smaller. I think this one was maybe a little bit bigger because we had like 1 barrel or so, but
And they never get too hot.
No.
That's surprising. I would have thought that volume of wine.
75 maybe at most degrees.
Okay.
It's never, I feel like we have our tanks hooked up to glycol, but we've never once used it in that sense. And yeah, for us, because we are not filtering our wines, and we also like what mallow does to the wine itself, like the wine's going through mallow is a good thing. But yeah, I think it is a myth that Riesling will not go through mallow.
And
you're not even inoculating for it.
No.
Interesting.
Across reds and whites, our mallows almost always start before primary is done. And I think that is because we don't do temperature control. One of the things that I have heard and has sort of been borne out by our wines is that if mellow happens concurrently with primary, you don't really get the kind of lactic-y flavors. It can, however, if the primary isn't very strong, it can kind of like suck up fruit aromatic. So we've had Rieslings that took a long time to finish primary and finished mallow long before, and they'd kind of like lose their fruit. They're not our favorite wines we've ever made. Yeah, also the other thing about Riesling is like, even in like not a super ripe year, the malic acid is usually not that high. So the potential for all those like sort of lactic flavors, I think, is probably sort of diminished compared to...
Because there's not a lot of mallow to possibly happen, or malolactic fermentation to possibly happen.
I also have a theory that a lot more mallow happens in like even German Rieslings than people are aware.
Interesting. It's interesting to consider. I wouldn't, like in a vacuum, be surprised when somebody says, I made a spontaneous fermented wine and it took 2 months to ferment, and by the time it was done fermenting, malolactic fermentation had also completed. But you're talking about some wines that have finished primary fermentation in like 5 or 7 days, which seems quick for my perception of spontaneous fermentations.
And even we worked with the same fruit, Riesling from Standing Stone, from the biodynamic block in 2024 last year. And that ferment was also insane. I feel like it was dry in 9 days and finished mallow not long after, if I'm not mistaken.
In 22, 22 was like incredibly slow. So I guess going back to our conversation about like biodynamic organic conversion and like the health of the fermentations, the conversion to biodynamics in this block at Standing Stone started in 22, and that was the first year we started working with the fruit. Fermentation took about a year. 23, their second year of organic/biodynamics, took about 2.5 months, and then 24, 10 days.
Wow.
Like, I think the microbial life in that vineyard is just like increasing and increasing every year.
Interesting. Well, it logically makes sense that it would. That's an interesting consideration that I hadn't met as far as farming practices relate to spontaneous fermentations, but it's logical. Yeah, interesting. So whom? That is listed as Gruner Veltliner and Geneva White No. 2, which, unless it's known by another name, is a variety that I've never heard of.
No, it's not known by another name. So the Geneva White No. 2, as far as we understand, is a hybrid that was bred at Cornell at about the same time as Cayuga White. I think Cayuga White was actually originally called Geneva White No. 3, but Cayuga White kind of took off, and Geneva White No. 2 did not. As far as we know, it's like Geneva White No. 2 can get a little foxy. So it never really took off, so it never was like fully named. And that fruit came from a vineyard on the west side of Seneca Lake that the team at Weimer took over, I think, in 2023. So they took over the farming, and after the frost, when we reached out to Fred about other fruit that was available, he told us, like, look, we have a small vineyard of older hybrids. Those are for sale. And for us, if it's a hybrid farmed by the team at Weimer, we just say yes, regardless of what it is. We also round up with a hybrid that we're not super stoked on, but that's also been torn up, so it's all good. So yeah, for this,
your transparency is intoxicating. I have to say,
not all hybrids are good. But yeah, so the Geneva White number 2, as far as we know, this is the last vineyard planting of it. In 23, it was on the skins overnight, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the website says that the Geneva number 2 saw 24-hour skin contact, and the Gruner saw 10 days fermented on the skins for 10 days.
That sounds like something we agreed to type in. Yeah, the Geneva White.
Roughly the truth, maybe?
Roughly the truth. We had no idea what to expect from Geneva White number 2. We did it a day on the skins, pressed off that fermented. I feel like it was always a little bit floral and like not super expressive. The Gruner Veltliner was fully skin contact. And we kind of futzed around with different blending options, but blended the two after the fact. And I don't know, it's been kind of a hit.
Do you remember, is it 50-50-ish, the blend?
I want to say 80-20, 80% Geneva White, 20% Gruner.
Interesting.
It's mostly Geneva White. And it's not fully orange, but it's like more orange than the Tokai from the Gruner.
With less skin contact time, which is interesting.
With less skin contact time.
I don't know if you want to give your opinion on who dominates who, hybrids or vinifera, or if you want to leave it to people to come and taste for themselves. I'll leave it up to you.
I think the truth is in the bottle. It's 80% Geneva White.
Yeah, as soon as you said 80-20, I thought the same thing, but yeah, interesting. So next on my list to ask you about, change the weather or change your mind. 2023, let's see, primarily...
No comment.
we can cut this whole section out. Primarily Merlot, Cab Franc, Gruner Veltliner, rounded off with Tokai Friulano, Chancellor, and Verdelais. There's that variety. It says whites fermented on the skins, reds, a combo of carbonic and semi-carbonic. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, maybe we don't have to talk about the wine at all if you don't want to, but I am intrigued with carbonic and this semi-carbonic, since it seems to be grabbing a hold stylistically. Other producers, I think it's easier and easier as years go by to find wines that are made in this style. But logistically, it kind of seems difficult. And at least when I ask people how they're making their carbonic wines, everybody seems to have their own setup, or they're doing it different ways. And so I'm hoping that you will share a little bit about how you're chasing this carbonic style logistically in the cellar, and maybe also stylistically, if you have an opinion on like what it does or what your hope is.
So sort of stylistically and like philosophically, we love a lot of semi-carbonic wines, like generally, red wines that are fermented whole cluster, wherein as the fermentation is going, and so you naturally get carbonic happening like sort of at the top of the fermentation where clusters haven't started to break down yet. But as carbonic continues and the skin soften, the fruit breaks down. So you're getting a more classic sort of alcoholic fermentation and extractive process at the bottom of the fermentation, but up top is more of the carbonic elements. I think we like it for a few reasons. One, the carbonic adds like pretty floral lift. Two, we like the smell and taste of stems. Ripe stems are... I hate cleaning a stemmer.
You also seem to be doing more stem inclusion than most people, I would venture to say. I'm surprised that, I just reading would have concerns about stem tannin and phenolics and stuff getting in there, but...
I guess part of it is we only work with hand-harvested fruit. And I don't want to say not that we only work with like ripe fruit, but I feel like we have in the last few years kind of narrowed down the number of growers that we work with. And knock on wood, it's early in the season, but we know that if we get Cabernet Franc that's farmed by the team at Weimer, shit's going to be ripe. That's not,
you can trust
really,
that to be able to include the stems.
Trust that. And there is always like a game day decision that if the fruit comes in and we wanted to do carbonic, but it's not as ripe, we will nix that. But I will say that because we're kind of only working with a few growers at this point, we can generally rely based on the year that we can get ripe fruit.
And I think if you approach a whole cluster fermentation the way that we try to, which is to say not extractive, really trying to like leave it be, you can encourage those carbonic elements and thus like actually wind up with a softer wine. I would be much more afraid of including stems if we were more likely to be beating it up and extracting a lot more tannins from those stems.
Totally.
But oftentimes we'll press a whole cluster ferment and you can't tell for sure, but it looks like the liquid only comes up to like half the fermenter, and then the top half is entirely whole clusters.
Sure.
And so sometimes even we'll the wine that you're tasting that we're measuring the density of, that'll be pretty tannic, but then when you press it, that's where you're getting the carbonic juice from, and that really like softens up the tannins.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Interesting. So the vessel that you're doing carbonic fermentation in, is it a like Welch bin or?
We have done it in a whole bunch of different vessels. The best vessel is this. We shout out to Daniel from Scout Vineyards.
I have their hat today.
Yeah, you do. We bought a 1,500 liter red fermenter VC from him. So, it has a lid that you can raise and lower.
You can kind of seal it off.
You can seal it off. You can dig it out straight from the bottom. That is ideal for carbonic. We have done carbonic in macros and Welch bins. That includes a kind of laborious process of saran wrapping. And then digging out is a pain in the ass, but essentially like you wrap saran wrap around it and then put layers of saran wrap over the top and then cut a tiny hole and gas it. And we also do like to, we'll like foot stomp like a tiny amount of it.
This was going to be my next question.
Yeah. So we'll foot stomp like the very start of the fruit going in and then dump the rest on top of it.
So you have a little juice at the bottom?
Juice is at the bottom.
To start fermenting and like produce some CO2?
Yeah.
Is that
So we'll hit it with CO2 or argon to start. But after a while, probably after 5 days or so, it's producing enough CO2 on its own that if you're keeping it sealed, it just gases itself.
We always check.
Yeah, we're always like, oh God, I don't know, is it producing enough CO2? And then you poke a hole and you like start suffocating. And you're like, oh my God, there's enough CO2.
It's safe. It's safe. That's really funny. How long have you been able to get away with keeping some fermentations like in their sealed carbonic chamber like that?
I think the longest we've done is 12 days. So we did a 12-ish day carbonic on Cabernet Franc in 2023, and that fruit was from Serenity Vineyard, farmed by the team at Weimer. I think, and that actually kind of worked out really serendipitously because it was 23, and we didn't think we would get any Cabernet Franc from that vineyard. We like booked a trip to New York to do some market work, and then like the day or 2 days before we were scheduled to leave, Fred was like, I have 2 tons.
Ooh.
And we're like, we gotta say yes, but if we do carbonic, we can just leave it for a while. But yeah, I think we did that to 12 days. We kind of like checked on it, tasted it. It tasted like hot sauce and jalapenos, and we were pretty stoked about that. But we kind of decided like we should probably, I think we beat it up. We did a few pump overs for a couple days after that, right before we pressed.
And we've also had carbonic not go well. Dumping whole clusters into a bin and not checking it for days at a time is a recipe for VA if you don't have a vigorous fermentation. So that changed the weather. Like the carbonic element was Cab Franc that we got from another grower on the east side of Seneca Lake. And it was just always kind of volatile. And I think we probably could have taken more steps to make the fermentation as vigorous as possible. I think we learned from that fermentation how to do carbonic a little bit better. But yeah, it's a little nerve-wracking when part of it is just not checking it. And so it can be pretty
The thought of it makes me nervous.
Mm-hmm.
The one opportunity that I was adjacent to carbonic fermentation was an intern that we had at Ravines, and we have like 10 vines of Pinot Gris that always becomes an intern project. And this guy, he said that he's going to do everything in his power to make the worst wine possible. He was being sarcastic. He was taking it seriously, but he was not afraid to like do something crazy with it, I think is what he was thinking. Mm-hmm. And he did exactly what you're saying, Alex, where he just put grapes into the bottom of a sealed container, and we saran wrapped a lid on and pumped gas into it. And we kept going back to it and like trying to smell the headspace of it without unwrapping it. And by the time like maybe 5 or 6 days came around, you could smell what was going on in there, and there was no free juice around the bottom, and it's kind of, he said it smelled like kimchi, and I think that he was right on. And unfortunately that wine after that like wasn't vinified in a way to be able to taste the final wine and discern like what that influence was, because it also had serious bumps in it. I mean, we're talking about a carboy's worth of wine, but it had other bumps in its life, and we'll never know like what exactly influence that had on the final wine. But yeah, it seems a little scary. And after that experience, I was like, how are all these people doing it? But the way that you describe it
very carefully,
it almost sounds very trustworthy, you know?
And I think one of the things that we've learned over the years is the way that we want to make wine, especially if we're doing carbonic and stuff, but this is true of all our fermentations, is like our goal is to get fermentation going like as quickly as possible, as strongly as possible. The best sort of protectant against Acetobacter or Brett or any of these things is a really strong Saccharomyces population. Mm-hmm. So we do what we can to get things going as quickly as possible. So hence we'll like stomp the bottom layer of fruit. We'll throw in a little juice from something that's already going strongly, and we really want things to sort of,
Have you experimented at all with Pied de Cuves? Let me just say really quickly, for anybody who's unfamiliar with that term, we're talking a lot about native fermentations, and Pied de Cuves is like you set aside a small amount of juice to develop into a fermentation, and then you use that to inoculate with, rather than just, I'm not sure, letting wine want to start on its own. It's seen, I think, as like a kind of more foolproof way of having a healthy native fermentation start. Given your experience with all these native ferments, have you considered doing with that? Or
so I would say sort of do it. So we have never like gone out and made a specific pick and said this will be our Pied de Cuve, but we have been working in a space where we have made our wines at Ben Riccardi of Osmode's winery space, and he also works with hybrids, so inevitably there's one fermentation at least always going. So it's sort of been like, we have this ferment going, we can take a little bit of juice. What? Yeah, sorry, and then also ferment spontaneously. So it is sort of like if you have this ferment going, I can take a pitcher from this, you can take a pitcher from mine. So it's not like this is the tank that is the Pied de Cuve, but we always try to add a little bit of something, but also always keeping in mind that we only want to add something that is before peak fermentation or at peak fermentation. Adding something that is like past peak fermentation, like that's not gonna end up well.
Well, why is that, out of curiosity?
From our understanding, the sort of that first third of fermentation before you reach peak is your yeast population is multiplying.
It's like the stage of the life that the yeast are in. They're doing more repopulating rather than like active fermentation or something.
Right. And they're doing active fermentation at the same time, but they're also repopulating. Whereas when you're coming down from peak, that population, that's kind of what you have left to finish the fermentation. So, I mean, it's like a sourdough starter, I suppose. When you're adding juice from the beginning of fermentation, you are increasing population. I feel like I'm repeating myself now.
No, I think that's perfect.
I will say that when we move into our own production space, a more rigorous Pied de Cuve program is definitely something on our to-do list.
Another plug for hybrids. Depending on what vinifera you work with, I feel like vinifera can tend to ripen and come in mid-September at the earliest, all the way through end of October. whereas hybrids, you can get them kind of in early September. So working with both hybrids and vinifera, it kind of means we usually always have something fermenting and usually always at a point that we want to pitch it in. So if it's Cayuga White pitched into, maybe not quite Riesling, that timing doesn't work out, but there's always usually like a consistent chain of this is now at peak, so we can add this to this. And then by that time, Riesling's at peak and we can add that to Cabernet Franc.
It doesn't always work either. I mean, dumping the juice always works, but timing doesn't always work out. In this past vintage, with fruit from our own vineyard, just had to like go on its own because everything was past peak.
But it went. No problem.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Letting things sit.
Sounds nerve-wracking.
It is yeah. I kind of hate it, and like it seems like a good way to get VA in your wine and for it to never go away. Yeah. But it did work out well. Yes, our wines are from our own vineyard are phenomenal and not volatile at all.
Maybe I can just go through. I think I already know the answer to these questions, but I have like a quick winemaker list of questions. I presume you're not like correcting for acidity, adding any acid?
Yeah, no, we don't correct for anything.
And are you adding anything like fermate or anything like that?
So for the first few years, we didn't add anything to our Riesling ferments. The one change that we've made is for our Riesling ferments, and we've added fermate O. Actually, to that and Cayuga White, starting last year. So for reds, really anything on the skins, we've never needed to add anything. Fermate O, we've added to Riesling and direct press whites, which is really just Cayuga White. And we'll do 40 grams per hectoliter broken up into, does that make 20? I think we do 20. I don't know. It was
an amount.
We add an amount, the amount that's probably on the back of the bag. And that's really helped us get faster Riesling ferments.
We don't know.
Or we don't know. It could be just the biodynamic farming and vibes. But I will say that making that slight adjustment has resulted in faster ferments. So we started that in 23 and we continued it in 24.
So do you feel like you ever run into any reductive ferments? And if so, how do you do anything to deal with those fermentation? When I have the conversation about nutrient, my brain wants to connect it to like reductive ferments. Do you feel like you run into any? The answer could very well be no. But then if you do, maybe how do you splash them with anything, or do you just let them go and maybe they coax themselves out of it?
So we don't really run into reduction with the Riesling or Cayuga that we add yeast to. I think that
fermate, I presume.
Fermate O. Yeah.
You're not adding yeast.
Sorry, did I say add yeast?
Yes.
Oh. God damn it.
I couldn't let that go because I knew that that wouldn't be cool.
I don't usually talk for 2 hours, so I'm pretty out of it right now. I think Fermate O does not have any synthetic DAP or anything in it, and I think that DAP is really what encourages the reduction. I think you overcharge your yeast and they become really hungry and stressed. How we deal with reduction is really just a splashing. Yeah.
A little oxygen.
And it is not really a problem that we run into all that much.
It's interesting because all the things that you've said would make me feel like you would, like traditionally the way my brain wants to work, and I'm totally open to the fact that this isn't Truth Capital T, is like native fermentations, warm, no nutrient adds, to me say like, I want to be reductive, which it's really interesting that I think it's a good argument for your method that you found, you know, I mean, if you're not running into reductive fermentations, I feel like you're doing something right.
Well, I feel like there's, again, I like to like props to the growers that we work with, but I do think we've had some reductive ferments in the past. Like we made a skin contact Gruner last year that was always in tank and got pretty stinky. And for us, it's just a matter of tasting, and we splash racked it to a different vessel. And then even to a different stainless drum, and it kind of has cleared itself up. But I feel like we've kind of gotten in a pattern of like taste regularly, know what's on your radar of like potential problems, address the problem when you need to, if you need to, but like also take a step back and don't make whatever you think when you taste and freak out in a cellar, like go home, sleep, think about it before you do something.
Yeah, that's just what I was going to say, that especially with reduction, especially reduction that shows up during fermentation. Fermentations, at least in our experience, they can be reductive one day. They can sometimes even be like, oh, is that a little prickle of VA in there? And then like it's gone the next day. So we try to give ourselves some time. We don't freak out and like try to act on it immediately.
And also, I mean, there are two of us, and I feel like we can each get in our heads about one thing or another. I'm always convinced everything is volatile, and I feel like Alex calms me down.
You're
and
good
Alex,
foils for one another in
and
that
Alex
way.
has other concerns, and I walk him off that ledge. Yeah, Alex is concerned that I've oversulfured everything, and I haven't. But we can kind of walk each other off the ledge.
Well, I'm slowly becoming convinced that it's just the chill vibes that the yeast are sensing, and they're like, we should not be stinky anymore.
The vibes are not chill during harvest. We are very anxious people. Yeah.
That's funny. Well, I'm at the end of my list of wines that I want to talk about, and most of the questions we've covered. Do you have any other wines or anything that you want to spend any time talking out loud about or anything like that?
Yeah, I want to talk about our friend Ian's wines, Behemoth.
Okay.
Amazing wines. They're all 0.0, mostly natives and hybrids. I want to talk about Mike and Ria's wines because they're going to do awesome things. Shout out to Dave Pittard at Buttonwood Grove for going organic on the oldest block of Cayuga in the country this year, despite having me guiding his hand. Yeah, I think we all need to do more to lift up the people around us. Yeah.
Well, it brings me back to
what you're doing, John, so thank you.
It's my pleasure. Please. Thank you for donating so much of your time and speaking to me about, everything that you're doing. And, it takes me back to when you were talking about how Usonia got started and the labor of love that it was. And it sounds like your lives were made more smooth and maybe even more possible by the people who helped you, people like Steve Shaw and the others that you named, to get you where you are. So, and, I think that it's probably this way for a lot of wine production places. I think wine production brings a lot of like-minded people together. And certainly in my experience here in the Finger Lakes, it's a community of people who are totally prepared to share time like you are and talking about the interesting things that you're doing and want to help people, succeed. And that is a beautiful thing. And good vibes make the wine taste good.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of like September and October and November when everybody is yelling at each other and bottling, of course. You can't leave out that because things occasionally have to get thrown when you're bottling. My last question that I have for you is my wrap-up question, which is, what will you drink for dinner tonight? Whether that's tonight or on average, what is Alex and Julia drinking with dinner?
We, of course, because we're douchey winemakers, need to say that we drink more beer than anything else, and it's true.
What's your like go-to beer?
Honestly, this is going to sound so lame because we're like 15 years behind on this, but we're going through an IPA phase right now. But like, not trying to drink fucking sweet, hazy juice bombs. Lawson's Sip of Sunshine, kind of an older school, more like piney, hop-driven, or a more bitter style of IPA, into that. But, on the dinner table, an awful lot of Italian wine, and...
Alex is a sucker for Sauvignon Blanc.
Oh, I love Sauvignon Blanc.
Alex cannot be left alone with a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc. Bad things happen.
Interesting.
What else have we drunk? Alex makes us drink a lot of Grenache and Beaujolais. But yeah, I feel like mostly Italian whites. Yeah, we're kind of all over the place. A lot of European stuff. I feel like we try to drink a lot of California stuff when we can. But We should probably say a local wine.
I can't think of any local ones.
John Albert wine.
I only want the truth. So that's great. Well, thank you so much for spending 2 hours of your life with me and telling me all about these things. And this is my command to everybody listening. Come drink Alex and Julia's wine.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye. Thank you all so much for listening. I'm thrilled you could make it to the end of the podcast. If you have any thoughts on questions you'd like me to ask or comments about your experience, I'd love to hear them. Please don't hesitate to email me at eastcoastwinemaking@gmail.com. Until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day.